The drama surrounding Caitlin Clark didn't explode the way most sports controversies do. There was no slow build-up, no leaked whispers, no gradual simmer that finally boiled over. It hit all at once, like a sudden power outage in a packed arena, leaving everyone blinking in the dark and scrambling to understand what had just happened. One moment, the conversation was business as usual. Debates about rosters, minutes, and matchups. The next, the sports media world was in full meltdown mode, acting like women's basketball itself had just been placed on life support. It started with a decision so simple on paper that it should have passed quietly. Caitlin Clark was not on the Team USA roster, and shortly after, she made it clear she was stepping away from the entire conversation. Not injured, not suspended, not sidelined by behind-the-scenes drama. She simply chose not to play along. And that calm, controlled decision detonated like a bomb. What followed was chaos dressed up as analysis. Social media went nuclear, debate shows went into emergency programming mode, and one of the loudest voices in sports media went from confident authority to visible disbelief in real time. Stephen A. Smith looked like his reality had glitched, like someone had just pulled the floor out from under the entire narrative he had been standing on. His reaction wasn't just disagreement. It was shock, frustration, and something much deeper that people didn't immediately want to admit. Because this wasn't really about basketball. On the surface, the arguments sounded familiar. Team USA women's basketball is sacred ground. Every player on that roster is deserving. No one is entitled to a spot. If the selection is purely about merit, then Caitlin Clark doesn't automatically leapfrog veterans who have put in years of work. That part is fair. That part is reasonable. And if the story had ended there, it would have been just another roster debate that fades away in a week. But the story didn't end there, because everyone involved knew the truth they were dancing around. This was never just basketball, and pretending otherwise insulted everyone watching. The moment Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, the entire ecosystem shifted. Ticket prices surged. Television ratings spiked. Arenas that once struggled to fill seats suddenly had lines around the block. When she was out for a few weeks, the drop was immediate and undeniable. The league didn't collapse, but the energy drained out of it in a way that couldn't be ignored. That wasn't opinion. That was measurable reality. So when people asked whether the Caitlin Clark effect was real, the answer had already been given. The league had lived it. And that's why this decision hit like a tornado. Because once you admit her impact, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend the numbers don't matter. You can't act like the biggest draw in women's basketball history is just another name on a stat sheet. The conversation instantly became uncomfortable, because acknowledging her influence forces everyone to confront a much bigger question. If Caitlin Clark brings millions of eyeballs to the sport, what do you do when she doesn't want to play the role you've written for her? Stephen A. Smith tried to frame the situation as concern. Concern about playing time. Concern about fan backlash if she sat on the bench. Concern about workload, about the fact that she's been playing basketball for nearly 10 consecutive months and might genuinely need a break. On paper, those explanations sound thoughtful, responsible even. But the outrage didn't match the explanation. Because if this were really about rest, about protecting a young star, the tone would have been calm, measured, respectful. Instead, it turned theatrical. Veins popping, voices raised. The energy of someone who wasn't just reacting to a decision, but to a loss of control. It felt less like analysis and more like panic, like watching a carefully planned script get shredded live on air. The unspoken fear was obvious. Caitlin Clark wasn't supposed to say no. This was supposed to be her coronation. The moment where she officially stepped into the role everyone else had already assigned her. The ratings magnet. The face of the league. The patriotic centerpiece of Team USA women's basketball. She was supposed to wave the flag, soak up the spotlight, and validate every storyline that had been built around her since college. Instead, she chose sanity. She didn't storm off. She didn't make a spectacle. She didn't throw anyone under the bus. She simply opted out, with the calm confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and doesn't need approval from debate shows to validate it. That quiet independence was the real trigger. Sports media can handle drama. It thrives on it. What it struggles with is autonomy, especially when that autonomy comes from someone who has been marketed as the savior of an entire league. Stephen A.'s reaction wasn't about patriotism. And it wasn't really about legacy either. It was about narrative. The perfect storyline had just been shattered. The idea that Caitlin Clark would always show up, always comply, always feed the machine with headlines and ratings suddenly looked fragile. And when the machine feels threatened, it gets loud. The irony was impossible to ignore. For years, athletes have been told to protect their bodies, to manage their workloads, to think long-term instead of sacrificing everything for short-term spectacle. But the moment a star actually does that, the praise evaporates. Suddenly it's selfishness. Suddenly it's a lack of heart. Suddenly it's framed as disrespect toward a jersey that will still be hanging there long after today's outrage cycle moves on. What made this moment even more revealing was Caitlin Clark's own response. While the noise reached deafening levels, she stayed grounded. She congratulated the players who made the team. She talked about watching the Olympics as a kid. She expressed motivation, not bitterness. No disappointment. No resentment. Just a clear understanding that dreams don't vanish because of one decision, and that 4 years from now, another opportunity will exist. That composure quietly dismantled the entire argument against her. There was no villain to point at. No meltdown to exploit. No angry quote to loop endlessly on television. By staying calm, she robbed the outrage machine of its fuel. And that's what truly scared people. Because when you strip away the yelling, what's left is an uncomfortable truth. Caitlin Clark didn't owe anyone this moment. Not the league. Not the media. Not even Team USA. The idea that she did was never about basketball. It was about control. About who gets to decide when a star appears, where they appear, and how much of themselves they're expected to give to keep the cycle going. That's why the reactions escalated into moral crusades. Suddenly, skipping one tournament was treated like turning your back on the sport itself. As if years of excellence could be erased by a single no. As if saying yes is the only acceptable answer when the lights turn on. Meanwhile, the same system routinely celebrates players for resting, for being strategic, for thinking about longevity. The difference here wasn't the decision. It was who made it. Caitlin Clark didn't follow the script, and that exposed how fragile the script really was. Team USA women's basketball didn't collapse. The program didn't lose its greatness. It remains one of the most dominant forces in sports history, with a legacy that predates this entire conversation. They haven't lost an Olympic gold medal game in decades. The idea that one roster decision would undo all of that was absurd, and yet the outrage made it sound like international basketball itself was at risk. Ironically, that overreaction only proved Caitlin Clark's impact more than any compliment ever could. You don't lose your mind like that unless something real just happened. You don't explode unless the shift hits exactly where it hurts. What hurt was the realization that Caitlin Clark has power that doesn't need to shout. Power that doesn't need permission. Power that doesn't depend on wearing a specific jersey at a specific moment to be real. Ticket sales, television ratings, merchandise, global attention. The league has fed off that power since day one. And for the first time, she exercised it on her own terms. The conversation about merit versus publicity tried to present itself as balanced, but even that fell apart under scrutiny. Statistically, Caitlin Clark has a strong case. She ranks among the league leaders in assists, outperforming several guards who made the roster. From a basketball standpoint alone, she belongs in the conversation. From a visibility standpoint, the argument isn't even close. She is the biggest name in women's basketball today, and possibly ever. That's why so many people felt like this moment was self-sabotage. Not because the players on the roster aren't deserving, but because the timing and optics made no sense. The Olympics are crowded. Attention is finite. Editors have to choose where to point the spotlight. Add Caitlin Clark to the mix, and suddenly even casual fans, even skeptics, are tuning in. Not just Americans. The entire world watches. And yet, the loudest reactions weren't really about maximizing the sport's reach. They were about preserving hierarchy. About reminding everyone who is supposed to be grateful and who is supposed to decide. Caitlin Clark disrupted that hierarchy simply by refusing to play along. The more Stephen A. escalated, the clearer it became that this wasn't about changing her mind. It was about sending a message. About convincing the audience that she was wrong, that the system still had authority, that the spectacle mattered more than the person. But audiences aren't stupid. They saw what actually happened. A player made a smart, calculated decision in a league that constantly demands emotional labor from its stars. And the world kept turning. The outrage couldn't mask the truth forever. Team USA didn't fall apart. Basketball didn't lose its meaning. The illusion that every star has to say yes was what cracked. And that crack mattered. Because if Caitlin Clark can say no, others might start realizing they can too. A league full of players who know their worth, who prioritize longevity over appearances, who refuse to wreck their bodies for someone else's debate content isn't chaos. It's progress. And in an industry addicted to outrage, progress feels revolutionary. This moment may have done more for Caitlin Clark's legacy than any medal ever could. Medals collect dust. Storylines fade. But moments where a player takes control of their own career stick. They become reference points. They change expectations. Stephen A. Smith will move on to the next controversy. Debate shows will reset. The noise machine will find a new target. But this moment remains. The moment where Caitlin Clark reminded everyone that she doesn't ask for permission, that she doesn't owe the show her body or her future, and that real power doesn't always announce itself with volume. Sometimes the most powerful move is staying quiet. Sometimes it's not showing up. Sometimes it's refusing to play the game. And when she did that, every microphone in every studio felt the shockwave. If you've made it this far, I want to know what you think. Was Caitlin Clark right to step away? Or should she have taken the Team USA spot no matter what? Did this decision expose deeper problems in how women's basketball is handled? Or is the outrage justified? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dive, story-driven breakdowns like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.